Hello and welcome to today's Knowledge Thirsty Thursday. My name is Rune. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a new educator with SafeLink Alberta. Today's 1 hour webinar will be recorded and posted to our website, which is safelinkalberta.ca. I have two monitors going here, so I'll be going back and forth. So tomorrow, which is December the 1st, marks the 35th anniversary of World AIDS Day and the start of Canadian AIDS Awareness Week. Like these two events, the Canadian AIDS Memorial Quilt is a powerful and poignant symbol of the history, impact, and challenges of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Canada and the world. As we will learn today, the quilt is a living memory of Canadians who have died of AIDS-related causes and a source of inspiration and action for the HIV prevention and treatment, as well as a tribute to the lives and stories of the people commemorated on the quilt. On each of my slides, I will say that I have included pictures of panels and sections of the quilt, the Canadian quilt, and I've also put in kind of like a little identifier at the bottom of each image with a link to where the pictures are. And that is Pumpkin, my dog. She is hanging out with me in my office today. So at SafeLink Alberta, this is one of our land acknowledgements. I will be joining you from my home office here in Mokinistis with my puppy Pumpkin behind me. I've been an uninvited guest here for the last 14th. I'm going to speak from my heart today. And so with that, I will share a little bit. So this morning, as I was preparing for this webinar, I went for a really long walk with my dog. We go to this place near our house that's filled with trees and brush and bush, as well as like kind of like an open field. Many people take their dogs for a walk there. In the summertime, there's berries and plants and herbs that naturally grow there. And I wanted to be in that space this morning to give, one, to connect my feet to the land and breathe deep in the air, but also as a means to kind of like calm my nervous system before coming into today's webinar. And while I was there, I was thinking about, kind of what I wanted to share in terms of land acknowledgement. And to me, land acknowledgements are more than just housekeeping or reading off of a slide. They're about really connecting personal experiences and feelings to the land, but also as a means to acknowledge the caretakers, the occupiers, or not the occupiers, I should say, the caretakers and the stewards of the land that have been here since time immemorial. And so what I do want to share is that there's Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and caring and healing. And folks have been practicing this, and practicing is not necessarily the right words. Indigenous folks have been doing things for many years before colonizers arrived here in this region, in these bioregions, and in this territory, or in these territories. And so folks had ways of connecting with each other, ways of caring with each other that were super holistic. People took care of the land, and in turn, the land took care of the people. People took care of the animals, and in turn, the animals took care of the people. The people took care of the water, and the water took care of the people. And people took care of the air and the sky, and the air and the sky took care of the people. And so when I think about being an uninvited guest here for the last 14 months, part of my responsibility is learning about the land and the people and the animals and the water, as well as the histories before colonization, but also um, acknowledging and taking time to learn about the histories post-colonization. And that is, you know, listening to people's stories, asking questions, doing research, watching videos and listening to podcasts. It's showing up to events and participating in ceremony and traditions when invited. It's attending art galleries and museums to learn. And it's more than just learning, it's also taking action. And so part of my last 14 months has really been about figuring out where my action lies. And part of that is sharing this today. So with that, I want to now connect it to kind of today's topic. So as we learn about the Canadian AIDS Memorial Quilt, I want us to think about the legacy and ongoing acts of colonialism and genocide, capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy, as well as the legacy and ongoing acts of colonization through and experiences that people had at residential schools during the 60s scoop, the impacts of child and family services, policing and criminalization, and violence against Indigenous girls, women, and Two-Spirit and queer and trans folks, and how these acts of violences continue to contribute to the racial, social, political, economical, and health inequities Indigenous peoples experience in Alberta, in Canada. I also want to, pay tribute to Indigenous communities and people who have really created community-based responses to a lot of these inequities, and especially those who have or who are rooted in kind of like an Indigenous harm reduction. And I mean, harm reduction has been a part of Indigenous ways of being since time started. We just use an English word now to identify that. But also part of this community-based practice, I want to shout out to the CAN, Communities, Alliance and Networks, formerly the Canadian Aboriginal AIDS Network. This organization has been around since the 80s and has really done a ton of work in caring for and research around the impacts of these violences on Indigenous people and their connection to HIV and AIDS, as well as creating pathways to care and knowledge around HIV. With that, the quilt, you'll notice in some of the slides, will have panels and imagery and material from quilters who have honored their loved ones. And some of these panels have Indigenous designs or colors and materials such as feathers and beads and medicine bags that reflect kind of the connection to people's experiences and cultures. Yeah, thank you. So just a quick note about SafeLink Alberta. We've been around since the 80s. We were originally AIDS Calgary. We were part AIDS Calgary Awareness Association that moved into HIV Community Link, and now we're SafeLink Alberta. We've been at the forefront of HIV response by providing education, harm reduction programming, and a variety of other supports to folks who were and are affected by HIV, Hep C, and other sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections. Today, SafeLink continues its commitment to reduce the risks associated with sexual activity and substance use through education, non-judgmental services, and harm reduction programming. We believe that everyone deserves a healthy and fulfilling life, regardless of their background or lifestyle. That's why we prioritize underserved communities. We're here to support and empower our clients every step of the way. I've added our website as well as our social media links if folks want to check that out. And just as a note, the image on the screen is one of the panels from the Canadian AIDS Memorial Quilt. It was one of the few that were tagged from Calgary when I did a search on the website for Calgary or Alberta-based panels. So this presentation, we're going to be talking a lot about death and grief and memory and memorials. And so I just wanted to put this out there that sometimes we might get activated in our bodies, in our brains, in our hearts. And so I just wanted to encourage people that if they are activated in this workshop, that's totally okay. Please do what you need to do to take care of yourself and engage in whatever practices that feel good for you in this moment. If you feel moved to do so, please connect with somebody that you know and trust and somebody that cares about you. If you want to not talk to somebody you know, connect with the Distress Center, which is based in Calgary at distresscenter.com or through the phone number provided. They provide anonymous chat, text, phone, email connections. And if it's super urgent and you feel that you need immediate support, I encourage folks to check in with 911. So memorials are ways of remembering and honoring someone or something that is no longer present. They can take different forms, such as objects, places, events, or activities. For instance, some people may hold funeral services or burials or celebrations of life. They may create monuments or plaques or art or mementos. Some folks visit or decorate gravestones to commemorate their loved ones that have passed. Others participate in sacred ceremonies that connect them with the spirit world. So these could be pipe ceremonies or sun dances, drumming, singing, playing music, praying, fasting, feasting, or setting up altars with flowers, candles, photos, food, and or drinks. Some folks may move into a mourning period and folks may wear black clothing, cut or style their hair in a certain way, cover their heads or their faces, or avoid certain objects or activities for a period to express their grief and to honor the dead. Memorials and memorial practices tend to help people express their emotions, make sense of their loss, honor and celebrate the life and legacy of their loved ones. Memorials are not fixed or universal. They reflect customs, traditions, and cultures, values, beliefs, and or choices of the bereaved and the bereaving. And they may not resonate with everybody who encounters them. Quilts are one way to provide some kind of memorial for someone. So they're connected to honoring people in death in several ways. They are often quilts are often made from clothing or fabric that belong to or inspired by the deceased person, which can evoke memories and emotions of their life. Quilts can also reflect the personality or the interest, hobbies, or achievement of the person who has passed. Some folks use color, patterns, symbols, or words that represent the person that has passed. And quilts may also be a way of expressing love, respect, and gratitude to the person who has died by dedicating time, effort, and creativity to creating a unique and meaningful tribute to them. Quilts may also be a source of comfort and healing for the bereaved by providing a tangible and cozy reminder of their loved one that they can touch, hold, or wrap themselves in. So HIV AIDS is a global health crisis that has affected millions of people around the world. HIV is a virus that can weaken a person's immune system, the body's defense against illness. And AIDS is a condition of HIV that happens when a person's immune system is too weak to fight off co-infections. A person can have HIV without having AIDS, but they cannot have AIDS without having HIV. HIV is treatable with medication that reduces the amount of virus in blood so that the viral count is very low or undetectable. Therefore, undetectable means untransmittable. AIDS can be prevented by taking HIV treatment and participating in things that will keep their health and well-being in a stable space. And that's often connecting to like social medical connections. Please know that AIDS is not a disease, it's a diagnosis and a condition caused by HIV. Since the first cases of AIDS were reported in the United States in 1981, the virus has spread to every continent and every region of the world. According to the World Health Organization, more than 75 million people have been infected with HIV, and about 32 million have died from AIDS-related causes since the start of the epidemic. The HIV/AIDS epidemic has a profound impact on the social, economic, political, and cultural aspects of human society, as well as on the scientific and medical fields. This is in large part due to the various forms of activism and advocacy, both locally and globally, to raise awareness, demand action, challenge stigma and discrimination, and support people living with and affected by HIV and AIDS. One of the most visible and powerful forms of activism and memorialization that emerged in response to the AIDS crisis in the 80s was the quilt movement. The quilt movement began in 1985 when gay rights activist Cleve Jones had the idea of creating a patchwork quilt to commemorate the lives of people who had died from AIDS. He and other volunteers formed the NAMES Project AIDS Memorial Quilt, which collected and displayed cloth panels, each bearing the name of a person lost to AIDS. The quilt was first displayed on the National Mall in Washington in 1987, and the image on the screen represents that date and time in history. On June 5th, 2020, the National AIDS Memorial brought together the power of the quilt and the beauty of the AIDS Memorial Grove together for a historic observation of the 40th anniversary since the first AIDS cases were reported in the US. So since its inception, this now 54-ton tapestry has been seen by 15 million people around the world, inspiring millions of people to contribute panels, start their own community-based quilting projects, such as the Black Lives Lost AIDS and Native Lives Lost to AIDS quilting projects. National quilting projects have also emerged. This quilt has also inspired millions of people to raise funds for like millions and millions of dollars for HIV and AIDS research and service organizations. Today, the original quilt is comprised of nearly 50,000 panels dedicated to more than 100 individuals. The quilt, when laid out and displayed, covers an area larger than 29 American football fields. It is the premier symbol of the AIDS pandemic, a living memorial to a generation lost to AIDS, and an important HIV prevention tool. With hundreds of thousands of people contributing their talents to making the memorial panels and tens of thousands of volunteers to help display it, the original quilt is considered the largest community arts project in history. The Canadian quilt was inspired by the US quilt, which toured through Canada in 1989 and received hundreds of new panels from Canadian cities. These panels form the first sections of the Canadian quilt. Although some quilt panels are still being produced today, most were created in 1989 to 2006, and the vast majority this was at the vast majority of the AIDS epidemic during the 90s. Unfortunately, the quilt sections are beginning to show their age. And like all living things, some show their age more than others. The Canadian quilt is not only a living memory of the almost 2,500,000 Canadians who have lost their lives to AIDS, but also a reminder of the ongoing challenge of the folks, the Canadians who are currently living with HIV today. The quilt, like the American one or the original one, is a symbol of hope, solidarity, and resilience in the face of a devastating epidemic. The quilt is also part of a global network of AIDS quilt that spans over 35 countries and reflects the grassroots activism and advocacy of the HIV movement. The Canadian quilt is now physically housed and maintained by the Canadian AIDS Society. This was since 2013. To preserve the legacy of the quilt, the Canadian quilt, and make it more accessible and visible to the public, the Canadian AIDS Society created a website, the quilt.ca. The website allows users to search and view the individual panels and learn about the stories and messages behind them. The website also features news and events related to the Canadian quilt. And the section 71 is one of the earliest sections created out of Nova Scotia. Was one of the originating pieces. And the image on the left is a person who was working with I believe it was the Nova Scotia People with AIDS Coalition, and this person helped create the panel pieces for the folks in their community that had died. Oh, pardon me. So the Canadian quilt is made up of more than 640 panels, and these panels are 3 feet by 6 feet. 8 panels are sewn together to form a single 12-foot square called a section. More than 80 of these sections form the Canadian quilt. Each section can be laid on the floor or hung easily for viewing. The size of each panel was meant to represent the dimensions of a grave. And this was what Cleve and Cleve's friends wanted since the beginning, or at the start of the quilt movement. Although it's difficult to believe today, in the beginning of the AIDS crisis, many people who died of AIDS-related causes did not receive funerals, both due to the social stigma of AIDS and the outright refusal by many funeral homes and cemeteries to handle the remains of the deceased. Lacking a memorial service or grave site, the memorial quilt often was the only opportunity survivors had to remember and celebrate the lives of their loved ones. Panels are made of various materials and techniques, such as fabric, paint, embroidery, collages, iron-on transfers, spray paint, and much more. Some panels include photos or letters or poems or personal items of the person who died. Panels also reflect the personality, interests, hobbies, and passions of the person that's being commemorated. They sometimes express love and grief, anger, hope, and solidarity by the friends, family, and community of the person who died of AIDS. They often convey different meanings and messages, such as honoring the life and legacy of the person, also raising awareness and education about HIV and AIDS. Some challenge stigma and discrimination, some demand action and justice, and some capture memories of the person, but also maybe the times together that somebody else was with them. All of the panels are said to inspire hope and compassion as well. The panels also tell the stories of the people who made them and the impact that HIV and AIDS has had on different communities. I've included a link on the screen on how to make a panel. This link goes to the American site of the panel. There's videos, there's how-to guides on how to make a panel if people want to learn how to do that. Anyone can participate in making a panel, regardless of their artistic or sewing skills. A panel can be made individually or collectively. If collectively, people might invite others who knew the person or cared for the person that is being commemorated. A quilting bee can be a healing and supportive activity where stories and memories can be shared while creating a panel. The style, content, materials, and techniques used to make the panel are entirely up to the quilters. The only rule is that the panel must be 3 by 6 feet in size and have a 1-inch border without any design element so that it can be connected to create a section. After completing a panel, quilters are asked to send it in either to the Canadian AIDS Society or into the American one if they so choose to. And with the quilt include a letter and a photo of the panel in its entirety and a photo of the person being remembered if possible. The letter may include the name of the person being remembered and anything the quilter wishes to share about them. Information about the quilt, such as what materials were being used, the style, the location of the quilt being made, and maybe a little bit about the process. It's totally up to the person to include whatever they want. And the letter is also to include the names of the quilters and the relationship to the person being remembered. The photo will help document and archive the panel along with the panel image and description. This way the makers can share their tribute with the world and keep the memory of their loved ones alive. The Canadian AIDS Memorial Quilt has been shown in various venues and events across Canada and the world. It's traveled to churches, to schools, community centers, museums, parks, art galleries, and a variety of public squares or spaces. Some of the most notable events were that the quilt was displayed it's often displayed during World AIDS Day on December 1st. It's also been shown at the International AIDS Conference, the a variety of pride parades throughout Canada, and sections are often a part of AIDS walks across Canada as well. The quilt has been featured in documentaries, books, and art exhibitions. During the display of the quilt, often quilts are folded in a lotus shape. And then there's a ceremonial unfolding of the quilt. It's often a solemn and emotional ritual. So when gathering to display the quilts, the lotus shape quilt is slowly opened, and it's methodically opened by a variety of people who who are volunteering. And so it's kind of like opening up like a flower blossoming. So while volunteers and participants are unfolding the quilt, there is usually people on a microphone or in a megaphone who are reading the names of people who've died from AIDS and who are represented on the quilt being unfolded. The unfolding of the quilt is often accompanied by music and speeches, prayers, memories shared. And this ritual is a way of honoring and remembering the lives of the people on the quilt, as well as acknowledging the grief and loss of their loved ones. Reactions and emotions of the quilt from viewers are diverse and profound, ranging from sadness, anger, shock, despair, to hope, compassion, solidarity, and empowerment. The quilt viewers are often moved by the beauty, creativity, and diversity of the panels, as well as the stories and messages they convey. Quilt viewers are often and also challenged to confront the reality and impact of the HIV/AIDS epidemic and to reflect on their own attitudes, beliefs, and action regarding HIV and AIDS. In an article that I found on Memorials, Ruth Jones shares that touching the quilt itself with your own hands is as if the histories of these people that are on the quilt are being transmitted to you, and the movement is alive. The influence of the quilt on raising awareness and action for HIV prevention and treatment is super significant and lasting, as the quilt serves as a powerful educational and advocacy tool. The quilt helps raise public awareness and understandings of the history, impact, and challenges of the epidemic, as well as the needs and rights of people living with and affected by HIV today. The quilt also helps challenge stigma and discrimination, promotes compassion, and support for people living with HIV. It also inspires people to take action and around community mobilization around HIV prevention, treatment, knowledge, and care. And lastly, as I shared earlier, that displaying the quilt also inspires people to donate to AIDS service organizations and research. Just going to check the time quickly because I know we started a bit late. I wanted to share a video clip of the ceremonial and ritual of unfolding the quilt. And I found this video essay on the American Memorial Quilt website. So please know that the images in the video are from the American one, and so it will show that kind of like that lotus shape of the quilt folded up, and then the ceremonial unfolding. So just a heads up for folks in terms of activation, the visual is quite impactful, as well as listening to the names of the folks who are being remembered. The video clip is about 1 minute. So hopefully that visual helps people kind of like kind of connect to that spiritual ritual customary practice of the folded quilt being unfolded so that folks, when laid out, can see those sections. This video essay that I showed the clip of can be found on YouTube and also through the American AIDS Quilt website. Just lost my cursor, apologies. Oops, there you go. So in doing research around the quilt, the Canadian quilt, as well as the American quilt, and thinking about memorials, and thinking about, you know, kind of some of the struggles that I had in terms of like finding information about the Canadian quilt or finding more about the people who are being remembered or trying to connect with different organizations across the country to find out the history of it or where it is being displayed was super difficult. So after having a conversation with a colleague, um, we thought about like, how do we keep memorials like the quilt alive? And so in our Calgary office and in our Medicine Hat office at SafeLink, we have a variety of different symbols that we have. Usually it's the red ribbon. We've like painted, we've sewn, we've like crafted a variety of different red ribbons and framed them and put them up on our wall for display. Some of them have names attached to them for the people that we've lost to HIV and AIDS, as well as in one of our colleagues' office is a ring and a photo of some folks who had passed as well. And so these memorials are active ways that we can keep the memories of these folks alive. Which leads me into like, how do we keep the Canadian AIDS quilt alive in terms of like, how do we keep it in the forefront of people's minds, as well as like ensure that it is properly cared for and maintained for future generations to acknowledge and remember those who have passed, but also to share compassion with the survivors and the folks who are left without those folks. And so I came up with a little bit of a list. And so with this, I'll share that the quilt is quite large, fragile, and sensitive to light, temperature, and humidity. It needs a climate-controlled environment to prevent deterioration and damage. Since 2018, sections of the Canadian quilt were being stored in 33 goalie bags and a variety of assorted plastic bags in the Canadian AIDS Society office in Ottawa. Memorials like the quilt may have a difficult time securing climate-controlled spaces and having a dedicated team to care for them because of several reasons. One is the lack of dedicated and ongoing funding to care for the quilt, but also for HIV and AIDS specific service organizations. There's also the lack of awareness that the quilt exists. There's also a lack of interest in its historic and contemporary value and worth. There's also a lack of space to properly store and display the quilt. And there's also HIV apathy. In conversing with some folks, people have often said, oh, HIV, is that still a thing? But also in, doing sex ed in rural spaces and local spaces with youth, I've also had people, continue to share misinformation about HIV as well as AIDS. And so knowing that even though HIV and AIDS has been around for 42 years and activism has been super active during that time, as well as research in science and technologies and educations and treatment, there's still a lack of understanding or care to learn more or do more. But that's not to negate all the incredible work that people have done, are doing, and continue to do. In terms of the quilt specifically, you have a role in keeping memorials like this one alive. So a couple ways that you can do this is you can advocate for the quilt. So you can recognize its worth and significance, history, activism, education, and art. You can activate for funding for the Canadian AIDS Society to properly store, restore, and maintain it, both physically and digitally, with respect and dignity included. You can also advocate for funding for a permanent home and display for the quilt. This could be in an art gallery or in a museum. And advocate for funding for the quilt and for those who would take care of it. And so this could potentially be like finding funding from a history or arts perspective. And also to find funding to document the history of the quilt and the people who created the panels, the people who are being remembered, and the worth and value of it. You can also check out the quilt online or in person. So if the quilt is being displayed locally, I highly encourage people to check it out. And if it is not being displayed locally, to check it out online at Quilt CA. And you can search for specific quilts. You can go through all the panels. If you wanted to look at the quilt sections alone, you can do that, or you can click on the quilt section and you can see each individual panel and their description. You can also create a panel to honor a loved one or loved ones. You can donate to the Canadian AIDS Society. By donating, you can help with the cleaning and restoration of the quilt sections, as well as the digitization of panel records for public viewing and archiving. You can follow the Canadian AIDS Society on social media. You can like and share anything that they post. And you can request sections of the quilts to be displayed at an event that you're hosting. And the Canadian AIDS Society and quilt.ca has all that information. I recently saw that requesting a quilt section, there's a bit of a process to it, and there's some fees attached to that. So just to give folks the heads up if that is something they want to do. It's also recommended that you give the Canadian AIDS Society a couple of weeks notice to ensure that the panels and the sections that you want are going to be available, but also that they can be shipped to you. You can share the quilt with your friends, your families, your communities, anything that we chatted about today, anything that you find online, or anything that you come across in your own research or readings. And you can volunteer with the Canadian AIDS Society to support the quilt. They're often looking for volunteers to provide some online support in terms of creating alternative text for the panels, describing handwritten materials, translating alternative texts and letters. If folks are in Ottawa and want to volunteer, they can also help with scanning and preparing any kind of like documentation for the website. And for more information about the quilt, folks can check out the Canadian AIDS Society website or the quilt website. If they're wanting to check out anything to do with the American/original one, they can also check out the aidsmemorial.org site as well. And I've included a few different resources and references that I used. I will highlight When We Rise, My Life in the Movement. It's Cleve Jones's biography, an autobiography about his experience being an activist in the States, specifically around the quilt and AIDS and HIV. And then the other one that I would like to share would be Common Thread, Stories from the Quilt. It was a documentary made in the early 80s, early 90s, and it represents 5 stories, I believe. I think it's 5 or 6 stories of quilts that were made for the original quilt, and the families that made them, and also the people who they remembered. It was quite moving and quite poignant. And then lastly, I will share that with World AIDS Day tomorrow, SafeLink is going to be hosting an event in the Calgary location. It's kind of like an open house in-person experience where folks can make red ribbons as well as like connect with folks with lived experience. I believe there's going to be a knowledge keeper available as well. And folks who make a memorial for someone that they love as well. That will be from 4 to 7 p.m. in the morning in both Calgary and Medicine Hat. We've partnered with Starbucks to have some spaces where folks can drop into the specific locations on the screen to meet with some SafeLink staff and volunteers, and also chat about HIV and AIDS, as well as SafeLink and accepting donations. If folks can't make it to these in-person experiences, we encourage you to check out SafeLink's website, our social media campaign, as well as our blog posts. We have lots up on those spaces. We also have training videos online, and we also offer a lot of training as well, like educational opportunities for folks. And then we also encourage you to like and share our social media as well as our website content as well. So we're at the end of our workshop today, or pardon me, our webinar, and we have a SurveyMonkey link on screen as well as a survey QR code, and I can pop the link into the chat in a moment. We often seek out responses from participants to help improve our work, but also improve and enhance our work, but also to show the funders that we're doing what we said we're doing, but also to continue providing and maintaining funding for what we do and what we could be doing in the future. The survey is anonymous and should only take a few moments to complete. So leave that up for folks, and while you do that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us for our Knowledge Thirsty Thursday. If folks have any questions, you're more than welcome to pop it in the question and answer, or you can email us at education@safelinkalberta.ca. And yeah, thank you. And potentially we'll see folks tomorrow at one of the in-person events for World AIDS Day. And if not, we hope to see you online or in future educational experiences. Thanks so much. And just while we are hanging out here, folks want to leave, they can. I'm just going to take a moment to close the window, and I can pop the survey link up into the chat.